So we're approaching the middle of the Tao Te Ching in terms of its total size. But we're still working on the downside from the square in the center of the Te. And this downside now, Lao Tzu is going to begin talking about his way of talking. And so chapter 70, which has the title Knowing Difficulty, begins, my language, very easy knowing, very easy practicing. In heaven, earth, none can know, none can practice. Now, this is very difficult. The language here is very difficult because Lao Tzu is a very superior mind, and he is using language to bend back upon itself and show that if in this recursive returning you have an ecology, it's very smooth and it seems like there's no effort whatsoever. But if you are not able to recursively establish an ecological flow, if in turning back, instead of coming all the way, you come just part way, then instead of an ecology, you get a hook. You get a hook in your language. And no one knows what you're saying. And you do not know what you're saying. But deeper, you don't know what you're doing. And so he says, in heaven, earth, none can know, none can practice. Language has ancestors. The characters literally mean language has ancestors. And then, parallel to that, dealings have a master. All of the motions, all of the dealings have a master. That is to say, there is someone, or if you like, something in control of the events which you do. In all of your dealings, there is a master. Just as language has an ancestor. Then Lao Tzu, characteristically, cuts that language flow and says, now as he, not known, not mine, known. Let's pause for a moment and the language problem that Lao Tzu is talking about has to do with the flow of consciousness. We talk about stream of consciousness sometimes, from Henri Bergson. In the writings of Faulkner or Virginia Woolf or Marcel Proust, you have a flow, James Joyce, a stream of consciousness. And that the mobility of the stream of consciousness is language, a very special language, a language which we, in saying, make the meaning. For those who went through the Saturday program, it's the difference between a magical language and a mythic language. The difference between a language which uses this world as a referent, where words stand for things. If you're speaking in such a way that your words stand for things, you will never understand Lao Tzu. And life will be very puzzling to you. So in beginning chapter 70, which bears the title Knowing Difficulty, he starts, and we start again. My language, very easy knowing, very easy practicing. In heaven, earth, none can know, none can practice. Now, the two characters, tian, xia, that are usually translated as the worlds, I translate as heaven, earth. Because it isn't so much a world, as in worldliness, or a world as in this earth. But what he is talking about is that in all of the dimensions, if man does not balance at the center, then he is dominated by paralleling events between heaven in its patterning and earth in its patterning. And instead of man balancing the two, instead of man being the bridge between heaven and earth, he is squashed between the two. Now you say, what pattern does the heavens have? Not just the motion of the sun and the moon and the planets, but their connotative patternings. To use an example, the celestial determinism of the Babylonian peoples, known as astrology, is a very severe, authoritarian, dominating system. And someone who lives their life according to astrology must consult their horoscope at every juncture, and must then use a kind of life activity which is determined by the astrological patterns of events. Or someone who is caught in an earthly pattern, who is responsive only to telephones ringing. You've got to answer the phone. You've got to go in because of this compulsion. It's important. Or your job, or your family, or your home. The authoritarian dominance of the earth is just as tyrannical as the authoritarian dominance of heaven. A human being is squashed, but especially when heaven and earth together, a mandate of heaven put in the hands of an earthly ruler, and that earthly ruler tells you, you must live this way, you must do this, you cannot do that, you cannot go here. So Lao Tzu say, in this situation, in heaven, earth, none can know, none can practice. There is no way to know. There is no way to do. To know what? To know the smooth flowing cycle of consciousness in a language that is free, free of dependence upon external things for its meaning. You say, well, where does the meaning of the language come from? If words do not refer to things, if they do not stand for things, if words are not audio images of the external world, what are they? They are, in fact, after a transformation, after an inner realization, the words are expressive of an internal balance, and one says what one wishes to say regardless of the external events. One uses a language which characterizes the pattern of wholeness of one's person, and does not use a language which is chained to whatever events are happening, whatever things are there. This second language is Lao Tzu's language. And it is a language that has a very special place. What is its special place? Its special place is in the fourth of the five-phase energy cycle. What place is that? It's the place in between Zhen, in between where we are, and the world of things. So that the language of Lao Tzu instead of being positioned in between the world of things and ourselves, with its meaning based upon the world and then brought to us, Lao Tzu's language is exactly the opposite. It is in between us and the world, but it is coming from us to the world. So that in Lao Tzu's language, instead of language standing for things in the world, the language in Lao Tzu changes things in the world, transforms the world. And so its meaning is in the delegation of value to the world rather than in standing representationally for the world. So that Lao Tzu's language is a creative language. The great American poet Wallace Stevens, in one of his poems, has a line, "Thou art not august unless I make thee so." By saying, a flower is only a flower. If I say that that flower is beautiful, then that flower is beautiful. I delegate, I give. My language creates the valuation and gifts the world with it. So that our participation with the world is that as creators, as shapers, as transformers. The world arranges itself in the way in which we say. So instead of the roots of language being in the world, the roots of language are in our ineffable integrity, in our Gen. And so that language in the fourth phase comes from our Gen and goes to the 10,000 things, goes to the fifth phase. If it has come from our Gen in a completely balanced way, Lao Tzu then says that that is spirit Gen. Spirit Gen. Now let's pause for just a second. Let's turn this on for just a second. You can see from this that Lao Tzu's language, instead of being dependent upon the world, is a way of expressing ourselves to the world, so that we are not rooted in the world, we are rooted in the balance of our Gen. Lao Tzu calls this spirit Gen. Some translations call it holy man, the holy person, the self-so-thusness of a realized spirit, speaks to the world, but does not speak from the world. Whatever the world they have, they think that they have because of the world. It is better to lose that whole world than to lose oneself. And so there's a religious, spiritual way of speaking, but Lao Tzu does not go into all of this. He expects that you are going to bring your spirit Gen to his language, and you're going to modulate yourself with his speaking. So he says, and I'll give you a different translation just so you can see how different mine is here. Here's a translation. I have a couple of pages of criticism about this. This is from the Essential Tao, just released 1992, Harper Collins, translated by Thomas Cleary, who's done about 25 or 30 books from the Chinese. Here's his translation. My sayings are very easy to recognize and very easy to apply, but no one in the world can recognize them. and no one can apply them. Sayings have a source, events have a leader. It is only through ignorance that I am not known. Those who know me are rare. Those who emulate me are noble. That is why sages dress plainly and conceal what is precious. Here's my translation. My language, very easy knowing, very easy practicing. In heaven, earth, none can know, none can practice. Language has ancestors. Dealings have a master. Now as he, not known, not mine known. Knowing mine, they are rare. Thence mine is a treasure. Therefore spirit gem wears wool, hides gems. My translation speaks the way Lao Tzu speaks. It doesn't read a kind of a Neo-Confucian, Japanese, Tokugawa type mentality, but speaks the way Lao Tzu speaks, but using English. His language coming out from himself does not come from some point. In other words, when we speak from ourselves, we don't speak from a point, so that the language would then splay out in a kind of an angle. But the inner quality in Taoism is a balance, an equilibrium, which has no poles. It's not a polarized equilibrium, but it's a harmonic which is consonant with Tao. And so in the consonants, our balance within is backed up in depth by our correspondence with Tao, so that when our language comes out, it comes out from this square. It comes out from the balance of ourselves and the correspondence of our spirit gem and the Tao. And so when the language comes out, it has a tremendous amperage and scope, and every word is resonant and sends out its own waves. Its waves crisscross with the waves of others, so that when the language is spoken, instead of it being broadcast out like an angle, every word is like throwing pebbles into the pool of reality, and all of the ripples cross and crisscross, so you get this patterned bouquet of meaning all the time. So that one could take the language of Lao Tzu, and you could literally, from any phrase, from any amount of it, understand everything that there is to understand. The only limitation being your ability to widen the balance within and deepen the correspondence with Tao. And so one learns to speak this language not by mastering sophistic rhetoric, but by deepening one's inner correspondence with Tao, and by balancing ever so much finer one's spirit gem. The more refined one's balance, the more the spontaneous depth of language reveals everything. It's like a language which does not point a flashlight beam of meaning, but a language which is like stars, which are radiant everywhere. So that the meanings of Lao Tzu's words are like a cosmos of insight that happens. Let's try my translation one more time. Chapter 70, Knowing Difficulty. My language very easy knowing, very easy practicing. In heaven earth none can know, none can practice. Language has ancestors, dealings have a master. Now as he not known, mine not known, or not mine known. I'm turning the language so it says exactly what the Chinese says. In other words, as the master of our actions is not known to the degree that the inner author of our life is not known, one doesn't then know the kind of language that Lao Tzu is speaking. To the degree that you turn that around and that you know the master of your actions, your dealings in this world, to that degree, Lao Tzu's language is known. And that there comes this watershed, this threshold, where you learn to balance yourself. It's like in a very small way when a child learns to ride a bicycle. Once they get their balance, they have a kinesthetic registry of that balance. They never forget it after that. Because it isn't in the mind as something known and then remembered, but it's a quality of one's capacity as a living being. So that Tao is a capacity of a living being to have balance in the universe in face of a kaleidoscope of scintillating meaning. It's paltry to call this mysticism. Yet, from the world's standpoint, it is very high mysticism. But from the Tao, it's paltry to call it mysticism, because it is simply and plainly the way the real is. That's how it is. That's how it works. My language very easy knowing, very easy practicing. In heaven earth none can know, none can practice. Language has ancestors, dealings have a master. Now is he not known, not mine known. Knowing mine, they're rare, thence mine is a treasure. Therefore spirit gems, where's wool hides gems. Chapter 70 has the title Knowing Disease, or Knowing Disease. Disease can be said with a slight pause instead of disease, sickness, dis-ease, not well. Not well in the sense of not whole. Dis-ease because one is not whole. The Chinese of Lao Tzu plays on this. Ping is sickness or disease. Ping, ping. So the character, ping, occurs in here a couple of times. If we count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the 8th character is ping. 9, 10, the 11th character is ping. The 12th character is ping. 13, 14, 15, 16. The 16th character is ping. So of the first 16 characters in this particular chapter, 4 of them are ping. Ping comes in the 8th place, and it comes in the 16th place. It comes at the end of the first 8 characters. It comes at the end of the second 8 characters. Notice the kind of strategic structuring of language that Lao Tzu does all the time. But in the 11th and 12th places, now if you subtract 8 from 16, you get 8 more. If you take half of 8, that's 4. If you add 4 to 8, you get 12. So ping occurs in the 8th place, and the 16th place, and in the 12th place, and in the 11th place. So that when he uses ping in the 11th and 12th place, he's putting it both at the very center, in between the 8th and the 16th, but he's also doubling it up. So he wants us to understand that when he's using ping in the 11th and 12th place, he's saying something that is right on, very refined, and yet there's something noticeably strange about it, and so he repeats the character. Now here's how my translation works. Knowing, not knowing, high. Not knowing, knowing, disease. Now only diseased by disease, thereby not diseased. Spirit gem, not diseased, because it's self diseased by disease, therefore not diseased. In other words, he's using ping to wrap around recursively one of those flows of language that goes out and comes back in an ecological way. But these ecologies are not just little circular cycles in the hands of someone who is unbelievably elegant, like Lao Tzu. Someone whose spirit is wingedly awake, like Lao Tzu, can play with language like a butterfly. And so here in the 75th chapter, he is using the word for disease, for sickness, he's using ping again and again and again, and showing us the way in which this flow, this ecology, this recursiveness, can have all kinds of convolutions, like a pretzel, and still come out leaving no knot. It's like somebody who ties a very complicated sailor's knot, and you pull on it and it's all gone. He's saying that this is the way a creative language works by example. That this language, which was talking about knowing difficulty, is now talking knowing disease, but in a very fancy, penetrating way. If we know that we don't know, this is a very high wisdom. This is Socrates' wisdom. Because in order to know that you don't know takes a lot of awareness. You have to have more awareness than just the given situation. It's an achievement to know, but it's a fantastic capacity to know that you don't know. To know what you don't know. There's no way that somebody whose language is dependent upon this world can know that they don't know. They think they know. Shakespeare says, a little learning is a dangerous thing. They think because they know something, that then they know a lot of things. And most people would be absolutely devastated to be shown how little they know about what there is to know. How pitiful, how absolutely embarrassingly petty their stock of knowledge is in terms of what there really is to know. So that the Tao has a lot of humility, natural humility. And you're in absolutely no rush to push this or that at all. Because in this awareness of not knowing, you can frequently see, almost all the time see, that there are so many possibilities and so many currents and undertows happening that the high intelligence is to go with the flow of the whole. And if you're in resonance with the Tao, whatever it is that you're doing spontaneously will have its correspondence, will have its wholeness. This Lao Tzu sometimes uses the term wu wei. Wu wei. Which is not literally not doing or doing nothing. But I've consistently translated as the not busy. Because when somebody's busy, they're caught up in a worldly representation of the meaning. And one of the first steps is to get a sense of irony that your busyness is unfruitful. The beginnings of wisdom are in irony, are in the ironic sense that you catch yourself being busy and you realize that it really isn't all that necessary. You don't have to lick 55 envelopes per minute. I mean, you could do 54. You could really cheat and do 53. You might even catch yourself in 1 minute and do no envelopes. When irony deepens, it deepens into a quality of humor. So that irony deepens into humor, and humor has the capacity to deepen into paradox. And later on in Chinese thought, when more than 1,000 years after Lao Tzu, there were individuals who learned how to speak Lao Tzu's language without being encumbered by a court language, by an authoritarian hierarchical responsibility of language. When you had people who were trained by themselves in the magical language of creative speaking and had never been at court, then you got a whole new quality of personality, a quality of personality that had never been seen in the world before. And the very first kind of person to speak this language came about 200 years after Lao Tzu. His name was Chuang-Tzu. And Chuang-Tzu occasionally has very playful kind of language. But about 800 years after Lao Tzu came the first of the really great landscape poets, Tao Chen. Tao Chen lived in the late 300s. And he's the first person who consciously and conscientiously refuses to accept a court appointment, preferring instead to remain poor and stay at home with his garden, with his poetry, even though there are problems of feeding the children. There are problems with the wife who says, why don't you earn more? There are problems because the bugs are in the garden eating the food that you need. And yet Tao Chen starts a whole tradition of the man who chooses to cultivate the Lao Tzu Tao language. And so his name, Tao Chen, really is honorific. Tung Yuan Ming is his Chinese name, but he's always referred to honorifically as Tao Chen. And he's the first great landscape poet. And he will have many, many, many progeny, many followers, many descendants. And Chinese mystical Taoist landscape poetry will be one of the great treasures of world literature. Raising to a height with Wang Wei and Li Po and Tu Fu, one of the great treasures. All of it comes from Lao Tzu. Why does it come from Lao Tzu? Because Lao Tzu is the first appearance of a seed in Chinese civilization, where someone is not looking to the cosmos for meaning. Fu Shi looked to the cosmos for meaning. In the Zhou dynasty, they looked to man as having an inner cosmos, and so the I Ching looks to the inner man for meaning, but in terms of the cosmos. The I Ching is all about throwing yarrow stalks, or throwing, as we would today, throwing coins, or roasting a tortoise shell. All images from this world. But Lao Tzu turns this world inside out. Lao Tzu turns this world inside out. He does not take his meaning from this world. He could care less about the yarrow stalks. He could care less about the coins. He could care less about astrology. He could care less about the court appointments. And so the apocryphal story of him is that at the age of 200, he left the court and rode off to the west. And as he was going through the Hankou Pass, Yunxi, the keeper of the pass, said, "Before you leave to the western paradise lands forever, give us something to live by." And so the 5,467 characters of the Tao Te Ching is his speaking this magic, creative, scintillating pretzel of language from himself. He didn't throw any yarrow stalks. He didn't throw any coins. He didn't check his horoscope. He didn't ask literary critics. He spoke fluently and left it. And so chapter 71, knowing disease. What is the disease? There's only one disease. What is that disease? Not being yourself. Not being who you are at the elegant, refined equilibrium that you are. Because when you're off center, when you're out of focus, nothing is going to be right. No wonder you attract bacteria to yourself, fungus to yourself, germs to yourself. No wonder all of these complications happen. They should happen. They happen because you're out of kilter. You're out of focus. As you come into focus, instead of them bugging you, they play with you. Give you a little vignette. When the San Francisco Zen Center, under Shinru Suzuki Roshi, decided to have a country place to practice, they bought an old hot springs called Tassajara. And they bought Tassajara in 1966. And about that time, they were starting to revamp it and open it up. But in the first year or so, especially the first couple of months, it was still an old-fashioned 1920s spa, hot springs, with the old little motel rooms and the stupid little swimming pool that was right next to a beautiful creek. The creek was a natural mineral water, so that the algae and so forth in the mineral water made the water seem green. And Tassajara is down almost at sea level in the Pfeiffer Big Sur National Forest. So you go to get there, the road goes up to the top of White Mountain, 5,000 feet, and comes all the way back down to sea level inland. And down at sea level, in those California coastal mountains, is when you get very large dogwood, which have huge leaves, which make chartreuse shadows, so that the landscape of Tassajara in its natural, pristine thusness are many shades of green, not only the plants, but the shadows and the water. And the stupid people who made the resort just put an old-fashioned, stupid little tile swimming pool right next to where the stream was, and put their stupid little row of motel rooms, so that it was like making a little field of cut grass in the midst of a beautiful wilderness. It is completely out of place. Anyway, the first people that got there to work on it were really interesting people. And I hiked into Tassajara. It was a very hot day. It was over 100 degrees. It might have been 105 degrees. Absolutely parched. And just as I came into Tassajara with a rucksack, just as I came into the compound, this monk came out of a building carrying a glass tray, a glass pitcher with a glass, all clear, with ice water, no ice, in the pitcher. And he carried it like an elegant waiter, bringing this drink right to me, just as I came into Tassajara. And as I drank that cool water, I heard laughter echoing through the whole hills and dales of Tassajara. And I looked over, and sitting beside this stupid little swimming pool was a Japanese Zen fellow who was absolutely naked in a swarm of wasps. And he was laughing because they couldn't sting him, because they were just swinging and going around him, but he was there in such a wholesome way that they couldn't sting him, even though there was a swarm of several hundred wasps. And it was a fantastic scene. This is what Lao Tzu say. He say, knowing, not knowing. High. The character for high is the character for mountain, shan, with a little glitch off to the side, saying that's where you are. You're up near the top. That's really high. Du Fu has a poem on climbing Taishan, one of the sacred high mountains of China. And in the part of the poem, he has a glimpse out of the side of his eye that he's up above the clouds, and underneath the clouds he can still hear the apes screaming down in the jungles. But all that he hears is the cool, clear, high wind of Taishan. And it's this quality that Du Fu gets from Lao Tzu. Knowing, not knowing, high. Not knowing, knowing, disease. Now only diseased by disease, thereby not diseased. The only real disease there is to have the disease of thinking that you know in terms of this world. This world doesn't tell you nothing that's valuable. But when you bring yourself in equilibrium, in consonance with the Tao to this world, then nature transforms into a cosmos and tells you everything, but in a creative consonance with you as an everything. Then science really happens. Then art really happens. Then a spiritual human being really occurs. Before that, there are only shadow puppets on a stage. There are no people. There's no art. There's no science. And there's no history. So the whole notion here that radiant consciousness is a given is absolutely spurious. It's not a given at all. There has to be a transformation. And there has to be a spiritual presence. And then all of this happens. All of this then is true. All of this then occurs. Spirit gen, not diseased. Because itself diseased by disease, therefore not diseased. Now, chapter 72, I've translated the title, Cherish Energy. Here's the translation. The people not afraid of dreaded, great dread comes indeed. In other words, when the people act as if there's nothing to really dread or fear, that's when it really happens. If you think that life just doesn't have any really evil, bad, dreaded things, you're in deep trouble. Because that invites them to manifest, invites them to come. There's a Japanese Buddhist ghost story that one of the early Western translators, Lefkadio Hearn, translated as The Tale of Earless Hoichi. In this tale, there's a monastery that's on a bay nearby where hundreds and hundreds of years ago some terrible military sea battle had happened and many courageous people had been killed, but one warrior in particular had been killed unjustly so that he left a ghost. And this ghost haunts this monastery because this ghost expects that the Buddhist monks at the monastery should be able to purify the land and the atmosphere so as to ground the ghost. Let's wait until the machines mature themselves. Haunts this monastery and actually uses a sword to kill people. And so they bring this special monk in who's going to sacrifice to ground this ghost. And the old monks paint on his whole body, his whole nude body, a sacred mantra which will ground this ghost permanently and forever. And so when nightfall comes, in this ghost story, the monk goes out and he sits, and he's going to sit all night. And as he sits, this evil wind comes up, and this violent, dreadful ghost comes in, and cannot see the monk because he's covered with this sacred mantra. But they forgot to paint his ears with the mantra. And so the two ears stand out, and the ghost says, I'll take these ears, at least there's some floating ears here. And he cuts the two ears off. And of course, as soon as he cuts the ears off, the monk loses the ears. The ghost has the ears. But the mantra then has sealed all the rest of the person and grounds the ghost. So in the ghost story, the person being told the story says, well, that's a very nice little spiritual tale, kind of grisly, and walks out, and just as he's leaving the monastery, notices a monk hoeing who has no ears. The people not afraid of dreaded, great dread comes indeed. Don't ridicule their places of dwelling. Don't weary their places in life. Now when not weary thereby, not weary. In other words, don't fill people with all kinds of needs and ambitions which they cannot satisfy. It's very bad business. Very bad business. Creating all kinds of goods, spectacular cars, spectacular Club Med vacations with bikini-clad ladies to a population that's increasingly poor is inviting disaster. Because the thought is always there, if we can't have it, no one's going to have it. They have it, we don't, we're going to take it. Because the only constraints are the constraints of this acceptance that there are barriers. Oh, that's their house, that's their car, that's their goods. And those barriers are dissolving, as they always do, when there's inattentiveness. So Lao Tzu says, don't ridicule their places of dwelling. Don't weary their places in life. Now when not weary, thereby not weary. Life will go on. It's made to go on. It isn't just one damn thing after another. It is one thing after another. When you take the damnable out, then life happens. And when life happens, it's much easier for the flow of down to occur. Much easier. Therefore, Spirit Gen in himself knows. Spirit Gen in himself knows not himself. Just like knowing that you don't know, you can know what is not yourself. Knows not himself, regards himself, cherishes not his own treasures. Not that we have things. That's not it. Therefore, he discards the latter, choosing the former. What's the latter? What's the former? The former is that Spirit Gen in himself knows, not himself. The latter, not to cherish one's own treasures. But it also then goes all the way back because 72 is resonant with 70. What was 70? Knowing difficulty. So knowing difficulty and cherish energy are like a tuning fork together. So let's read them together and let's see how they work together. My language, very easy knowing, very easy practicing. In heaven, earth, none can know, none can practice. Language has ancestors, dealings have a master. Now is he not known, not mine known. Knowing mine, they're rare. Thence mine is a treasure. Therefore Spirit Gen wears gold, hides gems. The people not afraid of dreaded, great dread comes indeed. Don't ridicule their places of dwelling. Don't weary their places in life. Now when not weary, thereby not weary. Therefore Spirit Gen in himself knows, not himself. Regards himself, cherishes not his own treasures. Therefore he discards the latter, choosing the former. Okay, we come to 73. Translated as chapter 73, Daring Doing. In Lao Tzu, there's always this sense. It's pronounced Jan, just like Jen, but it's a different character. And it means daring. Here's how clearly it translates. Boldness and daring means killing, he says. The character for killing is not here. I made several pages of criticism of the first 2 pages of his commentary, but I'm going to be gracious enough to. Here's his translation. Boldness in daring means killing. Boldness in not daring means life. These two may help and may harm. Who knows the reason for what heaven dislikes? That is why even sages find it hard for them. The way of heaven wins well without contest, responds well without speech, comes of itself uncalled, relaxed, yet very resourceful. The net of heaven is vast, the holes are large, but don't let slip. Let's pause here for just a moment. Let's turn off this translation and my translation. This translation uses language in the wrong way. Not the way Lao Tzu uses language. He doesn't talk Lao Tzu. In fact, he thinks that the Tao Te Ching is an anthology, a compilation, and that Lao Tzu is just some kind of prototypical figure. It's the same kind of, garbage that people used to say about Homer. Well, there ain't no Homer. Well, there's a Homer and there's a Lao Tzu. And they both speak, in Homer it's called winged words. And Homeric Greek is so far above the kind of Greek that was spoken every day at the time that it seems almost godlike. Lao Tzu's Chinese is so far above the kind of manipulative, rhetorical, pushy language that most people spoke that it seems beyond conceivability. That's stuff they're teaching. That would think. Courage to dare results in death. Courage to not dare results in life. These two things, sometimes beneficial, sometimes sorrowful. Heaven itself is rejected. Who knows the cause? Therefore, spirit gens even difficulty itself. Heaven itself's Tao, not quarrels, yet perfectly conquers. Not speaks, yet perfectly responds. Not summoned, yet its own self comes. Lenient manner, yet perfect decisiveness. Heaven's net vast, vast, widely mashed, yet not vanished. Let's try his translation. And we'll come back to my translation. Do you need a cough drop?
I got the great voice.
Would you take one? Let's turn off the tapes. Boldness in daring means killing. Boldness in not daring means life. These two may help and may harm. Who knows the reason for what heaven dislikes? This is why even sages find it hard for them. The way of heaven wins well without contest, responds well without speech, comes of itself uncalled, relaxed yet very resourceful. The net of heaven is vast, the holes are large, but don't let slip. Courage to dare results in death. Courage to not dare results in life. These two things, sometimes beneficial, sometimes sorrowful. Heaven itself is rejected. Who knows the cause? Therefore, spirit gens, even difficulty itself. Heaven itself's Tao, not quarrels, yet perfectly conquers. Not speaks, yet perfectly responds. Not summoned, yet its own self comes. Lenient manner, yet perfect decisiveness. Heaven's net, vast, vast, widely meshed, yet not vanished. Now these translations are different in orientation, and I will bring next week several different translations, and we will go to the very center of the Tao Te Ching. By next week, we'll have taken 40 of the 81 passages. I'd like to have you try something for yourself. Chapter 74 is the first one that we'll take, and its title literally is Overcoming Delusion. Now, just a word here about delusion. What's the difference between illusion and delusion? Illusion is something you perceive. Delusion is something you conceive. An illusion is a playing with perception, but a delusion is a playing with belief based upon conception. So the problem here is not to overcome illusion or to dispel illusion. In the late 50s and early 60s, one heard a lot about dispelling illusion. You don't dispel illusion. If anything is distilled, it's delusion. Illusion is a necessary quality because irony, humor, paradox, insight, all of them are based upon illusion. There's a famous book by Owen Barfield called Saving the Appearances. Don't throw the appearances out. Why does God need this world? Why does He make this world? Why does He make this? He can have anything He wants. Why not have perfection? Why have all of this? Because all of this is necessary. We are necessary. Because in the illusion comes the honing and the tutoring to see through. But the seeing through requires a transformation. If there were no illusion, there would be no way to know that transformation was possible because nobody would continue. The penetration of illusion leads to spontaneous insight. So this whole chapter 74, Overcoming Delusion, try your hand at making a translation. Take a look at 2 or 3 translations. Put their words together and try to, just like folding a deck of cards, try to get a sense for yourself of how you would say chapter 74, Overcoming Delusion. Here is the translation that Thomas Cleary has, just to give you a start. He entitles it, If People Usually Don't Fear Death. If people usually don't fear death, how can death be used to scare them? Doesn't sound very lots of does it? If people are made to fear death, you can catch and kill them. When they act oddly, who would dare? That's very strange, right? There are always executioners, and to kill in place of an executioner is taking the place of a master carver. Those who take the place of a master carver rarely avoid cutting their hands. Now that's a very peculiar translation. And it's obvious that he doesn't, even for all of his great world-renowned ability to translate Chinese, and he's been translating Chinese professionally since his 20s, he doesn't understand Lao Tzu. He doesn't speak Lao Tzu. He's translated every conceivable classic in Chinese wisdom, some very difficult things. If you read and mastered the shelf of books that he translated, one should be a Zen master par excellence. One should be a Taoist of the highest orchid rare ability. Doesn't understand at all. Why? Because he's not there. And it doesn't matter if you have a PhD from Harvard. You have a shelf of translations. If you're not there, you're not going to hear Lao Tzu. Because the only way to hear Lao Tzu is if you said it yourself and it rings the bell of harmony, the consonants. And there's an elation. There's a spiritual elation that comes from having said it yourself. And that's the joy of creative language. That's the radiance of the Spirit, having said it oneself. Lao Tzu many times in Tao Te Ching says, how do I know that this is true? And he says, by thusness. Because I made it true. Because I have done it myself. I've made it true myself. Let's count.